Hello there, finance friends. My name is Eric Young. Welcome to our personal finance class. In this video, I wanted to do a top-level overview of what we're doing in personal finance and to sort of give you a way that I think about personal finance. Now, to a lot of people, personal finance means a lot of different things. And part of what you're going to have to achieve during our time together is thinking through your own view of personal finance, your own goals, the systems that you'll build. Those are all very important. But there are some basic things that permeate personal finance. There's some tools that you need to know, some broad themes that are consistent no matter how you think about this. So in this video, what I wanted to do was number one, just give you a brief intro to personal finance. Let you know what I'm going to be doing in our time together and give you a sense, give you an understanding of how I conceive of personal finance. Okay? So, first thing that we want to do is we want to think about what personal finance entails. So, when you think about personal finance, many people think strictly of investing. That's their first thought. Wall Street, stocks and bonds, mutual funds, and that is a part of personal finance, but there's a lot more to it than that. And we'll get to stocks and bonds and mutual funds and investments, but there's a lot of preliminary pieces that we have to do before. So let's start thinking about what personal finance actually entails. What are you here to learn? The way that I teach it, I conceive of personal finance as having knowledge in four buckets, four categories of economic activity. So I call this the four buckets. And to me, to be good at personal finance, you need to be able to excel in four unique areas, four areas that are related but need to be mastered separately. So, number one, personal finance is about earning income. Earning income. Where does your income come from? Now, maybe right now you have a job, maybe a little bit of interest from a bank, but there's lots of sources of income, and tracking that income and making that income and understanding how that income affects your system is a real key skill. So we're going to focus number one on earning income. The second thing that we're going to focus on is using or managing that income smartly. It's not enough to make the money, you have to use the money wisely. And in fact, one of the things that you discover in personal finance really early on, it doesn't really matter how much you make. It matters what you control and what you keep and what you deploy to work for you. I mean, you can take a simple example and imagine one guy who makes $100,000 a year and spends $100,000 a year. And then imagine a person who makes 50,000 a year but only spends 40,000 a year. The person who makes the 50, spends the 40 and has 10 left over is probably going to be better off in the long run than the other person. Because it's not just about how much you earn, it's about controlling and managing your money, deploying it well, using your income smartly. And this bucket right here involves things like managing your debt, like putting together a budget or a spending plan, understanding the basics of income taxes, knowing how credit works. So using your money on a day-to-day basis in a smart, thoughtful way, it's not super hard. It's very boring, but it needs to be done. And that's a real critical part of being successful. Okay. Remember this. It's not how much you make. It's how much you manage, how much you control, and how much you can deploy to grow for you. And that leads us to our third big bucket. You earn money and you use it well, you also have to grow your money. And this is what investing is. So when people think about investing, they're thinking about growing their money. And you're going to want to grow your money to meet long-term goals and to live a great life. But growing your money through investing can't happen until you've mastered the earning of the money and the use of the money. And then the fourth bucket of activity, the fourth thing that we stress in personal finance is protecting your money, protecting your wealth. And this is where we get into things like insurance. This is where we think about setting up an emergency fund. Sorry, I spelled that wrong. This is where we protect ourselves. So these are the four functions that I use to teach the essence of personal finance. We're going to learn how you earn money, how you use it smartly on a day-to-day basis, how you control your money and not let your money control you. We're going to grow it with investing, and we're going to protect it with insurance. And those are the four buckets that we have. Okay. Financial literacy, therefore, entails those four buckets. Financial literacy also entails getting some knowledge. To be good with money, you have to have knowledge. And this knowledge applies in lots of levels. You have to have knowledge of the different tools of personal finance. You have to know how taxes work. You have to know what credit is and how a credit card works. You have to know how to pick the right account. Have to know about taxes. You have to know what a mutual fund is or an index fund. You have to know what an IRA or a 401k is. So there's a lot of technical knowledge that you have to know. Those are the tools of the trade. But that's not enough. You have to know yourself. What's your personality? What's your money mindset? A lot of the books that are they're pretty good books out there about personal finance, but I tend to be critical of a lot of them because to me, they focus a lot on the tools, but they never tell you how your own mindset interacts with those tools. So when we talk about knowing yourself, we're talking about having a sense of your money psychology, having a sense of your attitudes that you have toward money, and really thinking about your money behaviors. Do you spend too much? Do you plan ahead? Why do you do these things? Okay. One more thing that ties into self-awareness is really understanding the idea of systems. Can you think about things in terms of systems? Okay, a big focus on my class and how I teach money management is going to be seeing money management as one big system. The systems theory is something that we'll tie to over and over again. So do you have the ability to think about your money in terms of systems? Take a holistic view about how all the parts, about how the buckets fit together. And then finally, you do have to have some knowledge about the external environment. Now you can't control the external environment, but knowing about things like inflation, interest rates, the stock market, having a little bit of knowledge about the external factors that will be weighing against your system, that's also very important too. So you have to have knowledge, but knowledge is not enough because in order to be successful in personal finance, you have to put that knowledge into action. We could talk about all kinds of things over our time together. I can teach you about all the different tools of personal finance. You can lay out a great strategic plan for yourself, but unless you actually step forward and take action, nothing will happen. So you have to open the right account. You have to link your account to your checking account. You have to direct deposit your money. You have to request your credit report. None of these things are very hard individually. None of them are very hard individually. Most of them are very simple and can be done very quickly, but you have to do them. In other words, personal finance is not just about thinking. You have to act. Personal finance is rooted in action. And therefore, in order for you to be successful in personal finance, you have to think a lot, learn a lot, and then act on that knowledge. And that together is going to be really, really powerful for you. Okay. Another thing that I want you to think about are the different lenses through which you can look at personal finance. As we go through our time together and we're learning about tools and you're doing some reading and you're growing your knowledge base, I want you to think about the different lenses that you can approach personal finance through. Okay. The most obvious lens is going to be the practical lens. What is a mutual fund and how do you open one up? What is meant by risk and return trade-off? What is a credit card and what is a strategy to pay it off? So there's practical knowledge, really important practical knowledge. But that's only a part of it. You really also want to be thinking about personal finance, believe it or not, from a philosophical lens. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the purpose of these actions? We learned in an earlier up above, we want to grow wealth in our third bucket. Well, I'll teach you the practical skills to do that, but you have to ask yourself a deeper question. Why do you want to do that? What's it about? What's your goals? So there's also a philosophical aspect to this discipline, really getting to know yourself, love yourself, respect yourself, think about yourself. So that's a really important lens as well. And I don't want you to forget that lens. There's a behavioral lens. Ideally, after our time together is through, you will have developed good behaviors, smart ways of doing things. And these behavioral aspects will tie into intuition and awareness. You see, this is why I'm sort of skeptical about a lot of the books that are out there. They tell you to do things or they explain, what a tool is, and then they end. And you never have a deeper understanding and intuition and awareness of why you do things. And this can lead to some sort of counterintuitive ideas. So for example, there's a lot of apps out there. People love them. And some of these apps, I won't name them, but you know what they are. You can link your credit card and your bank account to these apps, and they'll automatically pull in all your transaction data and sync it really nice and pretty. And people love that. And I think it's a terrible idea. I would say you should never let an app sync your data. And it's not because of anything about safety or security, it's because you want to develop awareness. You want to track your own spending. This is my app. Simple notebook I picked up real cheap with the pen. And I write down every transaction. Every dollar I spend, I write down. I could have my credit card sync into an app and I would still have a nice little pretty summary at the end of the month, but I wouldn't know what I did. So as we're going through this class and I'm going through our time together, I want you to build up intuition. I want you to understand not just how a particular tool works, but the broad reasoning behind it. I want you to build awareness. Because here's a really important thing. I'll teach you some real basic principles of personal finance, but the tools will change. I mean, crypto is brand new. The Roth IRA is really relatively new. You're young. There will be tools that you'll be able to take advantage of decades from now that we can't even imagine today. So we don't want to just focus on the tools. We want to focus on the underlying thoughts, the philosophies, the first principles of the tools. The principles will always stay the same. And if you master the principles and you learn to build intuition and awareness, you'll be able to take on any brand new tool with no problem. And that's where financial literacy comes into play. Being able to adapt, to take on new tools, to figure out how they suit you. But that has underneath it an idea that you've invested the time to learn some basic philosophies, that you can have awareness and intuition about how a tool works. So I want to focus on those lenses as well. There's a couple other things I want to discuss in this opening video. where we talk about kind of how we're going to approach this course. One of them, even though this is personal finance, it is a subset of economics. So we're going to be applying some basic economic ideas in our time together. One of those most critical ideas in economics is the economic idea of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is a core idea in economic theory. And basically what opportunity cost is, it's defined as the next best alternative that you give up when you make a choice. Okay? We start in economics with the idea that resources, whether it's time or money or any other resource, resources are scarce. And those scarce resources have alternative competing uses. So, for example, you're choosing to watch this video right now. There's lots of other things that you could be doing right now instead of spending this time with me. Whatever you would do, the alternative that you would be doing if you weren't with me right now, that's your opportunity cost. So your opportunity cost is defined as the next best alternative that you give up when you make a selection. This is going to permeate a big part of our discussion. Think, for example, about when you spend money. Now, you have money that's going to come into you. You can spend that money in lots of ways. You can spend it on necessities like rent. You can spend it on luxuries like going to see a movie or going out to dinner or a vacation. You can invest that money and grow wealth, but you can't do it all. If you spend $1 on one thing, that dollar is not available for something else. If you have $100 and spend it to go see a movie and go out to dinner, that's $100 that you cannot invest or buy a mutual fund with or buy insurance with. So we're always going to be thinking about what choices you're making and the trade-offs, and that's the key. When we talk about opportunity cost, we're talking about trade-offs. Now, something about me you should know, I will never tell you what you should or shouldn't buy. It's not my job to judge your spending, but it is my job to get you thinking critically about trade-off, building up an intuition, building up an awareness, understanding that if I spend money on one thing over here, I don't have it for something else over here. And that if I have a goal and I want to save toward that goal, I have to be willing to sacrifice other things. So this idea of sacrifice and opportunity cost and trade-off is really important. Another idea that we're going to pull from economics is the idea of comparing benefits and costs. Whenever you're going to make a decision, you want to look at the benefits and the cost of that decision. Now, a lot of this is personal. You have to make decisions as to what you value and what your goals are. But as long as you're building up an intuition that you can't have something for free, that you have to make sacrifices, and that when you give something up and you're paying a cost, you better get a benefit in return, that's an intuition I want you to build up. This is really related to one of my big mantras for this class, the right tool for the job. There's a lot of financial products and a lot of financial tools out there, and we're going to learn about them. All of those tools have benefits, but some of them have costs as well. Things like fees or expense ratios or things like that. So before you buy any product, think about insurance, think about investments. Before you buy any product, you want to be really clear about what are the benefits of buying this product. And what are the costs of buying this product? And you want to be aware of that trade-off so you can make an optimal decision and get the right tool for the job, okay? The final thing that I want to discuss with you in this opening video is my lens of teaching this is a lens of what we call systems theory. Okay. Traditional personal finance is taught, in my opinion, in silos. So you read a chapter about budgets, and then you read a chapter about taxes, and you read a chapter about investing, and they're all sort of standing alone in silos. I don't want you to think that way. I really want you to understand that at its core, you are building a financial system. One of the themes that I want you to bear in mind in this class, you're here to learn, you're here to think, but you're also here to build. And what I want you to think about is building a wealth generating system. I want you to think that you are building a wealth generating system. You're not just going to be investing. You're not just going to be doing some budgeting. You're not just going to be thinking about debt. You're going to bring all these pieces together to build a wealth generating system. And I think it's really important, as a very brief overview, that I give you a sense of what systems thinking entails. Because you don't learn a lot about systems thinking, but it's a really important idea. Here's one thing about systems. When you think about systems, you first of all want to remember that all the pieces interact. The pieces are not in silos. Excuse me. All the pieces interact. So you want to be thinking about those interactions. And one way that I like to think about those interactions, I think about them as maps. I like to draw maps to have a visual representation. Okay. Another idea, when we talk about systems theory, we're talking about inputs and outputs and stocks and flows. Now, I'm not talking about stocks like the stock market. I'm talking about something else. Let me give you an example of how this works. I want you to imagine, and my drawings are terrible, but I want you to imagine a bathtub, or like, let's just say a bucket. So you've got a bucket. And this bucket, we're going to look inside, and this bucket is filled with water. So you've got some water in this bucket. The amount of water in that bucket is considered a stock. Stocks represent, now again, we're not talking here about financial stocks like the stock market. We're talking about the systems term stock. A stock represents an amount of something that you have. So the balance right now in your checking account, that's a stock. The amount of money in this bucket, that's a stock. Your credit card balance, the balance in your investment account. Anytime you're thinking about a balance, an amount of something, that's a stock. But stocks are affected by flows. So we want to think of it this way. You have a stock. You have money coming in. These are called inflows, or we can call them inputs. And they go in, and inflows raise your stocks. And then you have money going out. You have outflows. Those outflows reduce your stock. Let's go back to our bucket of water. Imagine that you have two things. You have a hose. So you have a hose that's feeding water in. As more water, so this is an inflow. As more water leaves the hose and enters the bucket, the stock goes up. So the water moving through the hose is a flow. The flow adds to the stock. But what if this what if this bucket also had a couple of holes in it? Well, water is going to leak out of those holes. That leakage out, that outflow, that's an outflow. It's a leakage. It's a hole in the bucket. That's going to reduce the level of water. So you've got this stock of water. You have inflows that raise the stock, and you have outflows or holes in the bucket or leakage that reduces the stock. Going back to your checking account, you get paid, money flows in, your balance goes up. But then you spend money, money flows out, your balance goes down. So it's really important when you first start thinking about personal finance and systems theory, as you start thinking about personal finance like I teach it, to learn about flows, to learn about stocks, to understand that they're different, but to understand that they're related. And systems theory is all about those relationships. Okay? So, thinking about flows and stocks. Systems theory is also looking at the idea broadly of inputs into output. In systems theory, inputs go into the system does its job, and outputs come out. So this part right there where we see the arrow, this is the system. The system transforms inputs into outputs. Okay? So as you make money and then you invest money, you grow your wealth. The input was your cash. The input was your savings tool. The input was your investing tool. And the output, the outcome was wealth. Okay? That's why I say that in this class, we're not just going to learn about stuff, we're going to build a wealth building system. Okay? In other words, I guess another way to put it, you're going to build a wealth generating system. So you're going to be a personal finance student on the one hand, and you're also going to be an architect on the other hand. And building up architecture, building up a system is just as critical as making good choices on opportunity cost. Okay, so systems thinking is about flows and stocks. We know that inflows will raise your stock and outflows will reduce it. It's about inputs and outputs and how things are related. It's about you building up an architecture. The final thing I want to talk about when it comes to this systems idea is what we call a feedback loop. A feedback loop, generally speaking, refers to the idea that in a system, things don't just move across in a linear way and that's it. Things move across, but then things come back. And whenever any process turns back on itself and affects itself, that's called a feedback loop. Feedback loops can be positive feedback loops. They could be negative feedback loops. But it's really important that you understand the power of these things. So let me give you an idea of how feedback loops might work. So let's put all this together. Let's say that you have income. So you have a job. Maybe you have a second job. So you have job one and you have job two. And maybe you have some other source of income. And all three of these sources of income, they come together into your checking account. We see flows, we see a stock. From your checking account, you can choose to spend your money in three ways. You can choose to spend your money on obligations. You can choose to spend your money on luxuries, or you can choose to deploy your money towards savings and investment. So we see a flow diagram, and we're starting to see the beginnings of inputs and outputs. Now, let's think this. Let's take savings and investments. Why is saving and investing so important? Well, here's the reason why. Let's modify this map a little bit. We have income. Suppose that you deploy that income and you buy assets. Okay, that's all investing is. So investing, which is this arrow here, investing is using your cash to buy assets. That's it. Pretty straightforward stuff. But think about this. You use your income, you buy assets, but those assets generate income. Think about it. You used income to buy stocks or bonds or mutual funds, or you have it in a high yield savings. Those assets generate more income. So those assets can generate interest or dividends, or if you have a rental property, rental income. Well, get this. All of these, so these assets generate this income. Well, this income feeds back. So you have some income, you buy some assets. Once you buy the assets, those assets generate more income, which feeds back. And now you have even more income. So you can buy even more assets and generate even more dividends and more interest and more rental income. And that leads you to more cash. And this arrow gets a bit fatter. And now you're generating even more income. So you see the idea. It wasn't just income, you get interest and dividends, and then you're done. That circles back and it circles back. And that's a feedback loop. You can see over time that if you really start young and play this game well, you can get to a point, in your 50s or 60s where you're financially free. What does financial freedom mean? Well, financial freedom means that you have so much assets, you've acquired so many assets, you've invested so well that you're generating enough income on the assets to where you don't need to work anymore. To pull that back up here, in other words, theoretically, you can quit early and give up your jobs, separate your income from your labor because you're making so much income from your investments that that gives you enough money to live on. So we're thinking about systems and feedback loops. That's a positive feedback loop. Investing, which leads to more income, so you can invest more, which leads to more income. We can also have negative feedback loops too. Like debt is a real nasty feedback loop because let's talk about the debt feedback loop. If you have debt, then you have to pay interest. And the more interest you pay, the less cash you have. And the less cash you have, if you're not careful, the more you have to borrow. And right now, there should be some red flags flashing here, red flags waving, because the more you have to borrow, the more debt you take on. And then the more interest you have to pay. Then the less money you have available for all the other things in life, like rent or food or transportation or insurance. And then you have to borrow even more. And all of a sudden, and it happens really quick, these feedback loops, you're in a really, really nasty debt cycle and you're drowning and you can't get out. Okay. So this is the power of thinking about systems. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. In our upcoming videos, we're going to learn some basic fundamentals of personal finance, including the power of time and how interest rates compound over time. Okay, take care and thanks for your time.